Welcome to our cross-border conversation on creating supportive teams when telling emotionally tough stories. Thank you also to Genelec for their support of this series of talks. I'll hand first to Stephanie Hazel-Lyle to introduce herself and then hand round the room.
Thanks. I'm Stephanie Hazel-Lyle. I am a filmmaker and I'm also the founder of a social impact organization called Girls First International.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Mumper. I'm a recently graduated filmmaker from York University in Toronto. I work, and aspire to work mainly in narrative film and TV, but also have a strong passion for documentary storytelling. I'm relatively new to the industry, so I'm humbled to be a part of this conversation, and I can't wait to hear what everybody has to say.
My name's Stephanie Philo. I am a TV and film editor and producer. I've been at it since about 2006, so that's maybe 17 years. And I feel like I've spent a majority of it kind of focused more on the social impact and social justice side of programming. So I started in documentary, and I'm more focused in scripted world now, but I tend to bounce between the two worlds. Usually I just go for projects that I feel like I can maybe lend a voice to or perspective to that's needed. Some of my recent projects are Dahmer, Black Lady Sketch Show, History of the World Part 2, and We Grown Now, which is premiering soon.
My name is Paula. I am currently a documentary researcher working in TV at a production company, working on feature documentaries in the area of sports. I've been in TV for just over 2 years now. And I like focusing on telling stories from marginalized communities. I'm currently working on a short film on the first day of school for first generation migrants in the UK, and I'm London based.
So just a little bit about me. I am driven by narratives that embody that human spirit, the triumph of the human spirit. On a day-to-day basis, I'm also a marketing communication specialist, but I've pretty much grown up on the stage, acting and singing. And as I've gotten older, I've become much more concerned for different issues, particularly those affecting girls and women. And that kind of has made way for me to use my background in the performing arts for a greater purpose, I would say. And so I'm interested in amplifying voices through the lens of filmmaking. In my case, for example, working with Kindle, this was a project that was funded by UNICEF Jamaica on behalf of Spotlight Initiative in association with the Jamaica Film and Theatre Association. And they pretty much had thrown out a call for persons to submit ideas or submit actual stories, rather, of survivors of gender-based violence. And the goal was to show that story of triumph. How can we inspire change in our society, and how can we help to limit the atrocities that are happening to people where violence is concerned? And so that was very clear. It was very clear what the motive needed to be. Talking about issues that are sensitive, things like intimate partner abuse, sexual assault, molestation, rape, any of those types of issues would be considered sensitive. And so you want to ensure that your team is aware of some of those sensitivities, the triggers. So there was a training session for all of us as filmmakers, but there was also a need for internal training sessions that were more specific to your subject or the story that you were telling. And so in our case, we knew that our survivor, in a nutshell, survived her ex-partner burning her home on fire while she and their children were in the house. And I also just want to give a small trigger warning as well for any of the content that I might be showing, and for the rest of the presenters.
One day I wanted to go somewhere. I think I wanted to visit my mom, and he was saying no. And we ended up in a huge fight, and he held the cutlass, the machete, to my neck. And he was like, if you go through the door, I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to kill your children. And I was saying to myself that I can take the licks, but when it comes to my children, you don't threaten my children. And I pushed him. I said, you're gonna have to kill me first before you get to my boys. And I took my boys. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to leave. So this older man thought that he would not come and violate his house. And so he said, of course, you can go and stay in the shed. He would come to the house, like every night, he would still come to the house. I could smell him because he smoked. There was a coconut tree near to the house, and he would sit under the coconut tree and he would smoke, and he would listen to see if anybody else was in the house beside me and the boys.
She survived this horrific act, and so again, some of those sensitivities that we wanted to be aware of were her family members. You know, would it be okay if, you know, at the end of this production, if this is shown, are your family members okay with, you know, this information about them being displayed? Are you okay with however that might affect the dynamic, you know, with your family members and things like that? So it's all about communication. We had those conversations with our subject of our documentary. Delmarine Morris Williams is her name, and she made sure to have whatever conversations she needed to have, and so we were all pretty much aware of what was happening. The other aspect I wanted to mention here was, even in terms of the set, you know, so where the location of where we shot our film, they also needed to be informed of what, you know, what we're doing, you know, and this was particularly shot in what we would call an inner city community in Jamaica. So a bit volatile. And so there has to be relationships, first of all, with these communities. And there has to be like like completely open lines of communication, so they understand why we're coming to shoot, what we're going to do. We had certain scenes that required us to actually light a fire, you know, in line with the story. So again, your motive also drives the level of communication at which you'll have to operate with all, you know, people involved.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in, I think knowing your motivations for why you're making this piece of art is very important, especially when right now I'm in the casting phase for my short, and all the kind of casting research I've done in the past, it's really important to be clear and transparent with anybody that you're getting involved in front of the camera, because I think you can have this idea of what you want your art to look like, and then try and find the right people. But if you're not being honest about what you want from them, I think there's a lot of like mistrust that can happen if you're trying to tell a story and you've not actually communicated that to the subjects that you want. And I think there's a lot of sensitivity when you're putting somebody in front of a camera. So knowing your motives for the story you're trying to tell and communicating that transparently is something that I think I'm also learning as well.
In our case, we knew our goal was to give agency to our survivor. Like, that was our main goal. You know, we wanted her to have the platform to tell her story, to show what survival meant for her, and to inspire others, you know, while we also wanted to educate persons about gender-based violence and violence against girls and women in particular, and, you know, just show what happens in some of these intimate partner relationships.
On the post-production side, you know, a lot of the things that you're saying are things that we apply, you know, when we're approaching the edit as well. You know, as a you know, as someone who's hiring an assistant editor or a team behind me, like, I need to make sure that we're all approaching it with the sensitivity and the research and the care that a project really needs. So for example, on Dahmer, I made sure that I found an assistant editor who was just as passionate about telling the story as I was. And we, you know, made sure to, because the content is so triggering and so heavy, we would check in with each other every single day, like every morning, every evening, like how are you holding up during this? How, you know, what can we bring to the story to help tell it as authentically as we can. You know, and I think it's just so important when we're telling any stories that are either about real people or about real topics that we really want to affect change in, that we're really approaching it in a genuine way. I know we spent every day watching documentaries, reading books about this topic, you know, realizing that this has been a topic that's been sensationalized so much over the years, and how do we tell it in a different way? How do we maybe highlight voices that weren't highlighted, or showcase a system that was not, that has never really been talked about? You know, so it's, as filmmakers, it's just so important for us to approach, you know, figure out what the motives are in telling the project, figure out like how you can bring yourself also authentically to the project. And that applies to, you know, upbeat stories as well. You know, on a Black Lady sketch show, we do the same thing where, you know, it's like, oh, there's so many hundreds of different types of Black women, thousands of types of Black women. How do we showcase that? You know, there's a very stereotypical version of like what a funny Black woman is. Like, how do we show that that's not the case? There's thousands of us, you know, there's thousands of types of women. You know, so much of us telling these stories is about figuring out what our motives are, figuring out the best way to tell them, and also just like finding teams and people who can, you know, bring the story forward as best as possible.
So this is just a little excerpt on the other project that I wanted to reference, which is called Unbound. I suppose that kind of segues into the shoot day or the shooting days. It's about a detective who teams up with a rogue Jamaica Defense Force officer to stop a sex trafficking ring in Jamaica. So this film kind of touched on sex trafficking, sex tourism. So for us, with this project, it's so important to be conscious of the tone of the atmosphere. You know, there has to be somebody who is just paying attention to everybody. I guess you could say I feel that role because I've played the role of being so integral in the development of these projects. I kind of have a sense of the individuals that we're working with. And we found that once everybody developed these relationships prior to the shooting day, and you know, we're rehearsing, we're coming in for fight training sessions, we're integrating pretty frequently long before the shoot day. So I think that also helps.
You know what me like is take it off. And about no no ball, you know.
As you can imagine, being in a situation like that, for her was uncomfortable. And even if we would have explained it to her before, and we rehearsed several times before, still nothing really compares to the actual day when this is actually happening and all the cameras are there. And so you just kind of want to make sure that you're paying attention to any signs that people might be uncomfortable, and don't be afraid to pause and check in. Yes, you might be working with time constraints. Shoots are always really restricted when it comes on to time, and time is money. And yes, there are all these different things, but we care about people first. On set, it's also recommended for dealing with sensitive or hard issue topics. It's always great to have a psychologist or a trained counselor on hand. And then, if possible, maybe your talent, if they'd like to have a family member or somebody that that can help them to feel comfortable with, have them there as well. That helps too.
There's a film that I just worked on that released or is releasing soon called We Grown Now, is told through the perspective of kids in 1990s Chicago, Cabrini Green, which has kind of been portrayed as like a very gang-ridden, like violent place. And we were very like we were trying throughout the entire process to find a way that we could tell the story through these kids' perspective. You know, kids living in Chicago in the 90s, and you know, through a lot of research and talking for years to different people who lived in Cabrini Green in the 90s, you know, kind of told a very different story. Who, you know, the people who were young kids still had a very childlike time. It was still full of magic and wonder and kind of this amazing they just had like an amazing, you know, childhood growing up experience. And, you know, these things happen that do affect them and affect their perspectives as they're going through life. But it was so important to show how they would walk through it. And something that our director did every day that I thought was interesting was she would like give them like an imaginary cloak, you know, because she didn't want them to take the trauma of certain scenes home with them. So she would be like, okay, you're putting on your character cloak now and we're taking it off. And just was very like just very cognizant of the fact that these kids, you know, they're still young kids themselves experiencing life, you know, and they just need to be able to separate themselves from it. So we did also have, you know, on-set therapy as well for them, just in case they needed it, as much support as possible for them while they were telling these, trying to tell these different stories.
In Cabrini Green, there's only one rule on the playground. It don't matter how old you are, how much money you got, how big or tall, or small. All that matters is if you can jump.
That clip basically sets up the movie, but you'll see as I was talking about the basically just trying to set up this like childlike wonder, because there is like a world around them that does contain violence, does contain trauma, but it was so important to make sure that we're setting up that these kids are also just experiencing the world, you know. And sometimes activism and social justice is just a matter of showing people in their everyday lives, you know, showing that people are people and the place is the people was really the, you know, thesis of this film essentially. You know, we had during the 90s and during this film, there's a child who was shot who dies. So you do see the kids' sort of reaction to that. But we had, I know our director had the actual mother of the child, Dantrell Davis, who was shot and died in Cabrini Green in the 90s, who would like watch footage, who I don't know how she managed to do this. I would be heartbroken to watch footage, but she, you know, really provided so much feedback for the film and was there on set some days. And, you know, it's I think just so important to have all these voices involved as you're telling it.
I just wanted to say, Steph and Stephanie, like both of your films are incredible and very inspirational to me to see. I wanted to also touch on creating kind of making things kind of light when dealing with such serious topics to kind of keep everyone, you know, level-headed. Again, like I said, this was my first experience dealing with such a sensitive topic, so it was something I had to learn, because when we were speaking to you know, the unhoused community down in Los Angeles, and it was a very, very eye-opening experience, because, you know, one thing that was very surprising, this was also the first time I actually went to LA when we shot this mini documentary. One thing that was very surprising to me was just how invisible they kind of are to the general public, like seeing people walk down Sunset Boulevard seeing red carpet openings and stuff like that, just like right in front of like homeless tents. And I feel like it was just a very, very tough kind of thing to have to look at and not be able to look away, and it takes a toll on you. So I definitely felt the effects of that, because I don't think we had kind of a strategy in place to make things lighter. We were just it was a very guerrilla style filmmaking too. So we were just kind of out on our feet and, constantly seeing it. So I think that advice is extremely helpful. And I think it's something I'll have to carry on to my, next project as well.
She gifted me a purse to wear around my waist before I left. I laughed, and she scolded me. The LA she used to know is a distant memory. This is America, remember? There's a sadness in her eyes as she speaks, and I'm reminded of the bleak reality of being Black in America. I'm sorry, but her words of warning aren't about Blackness.
That was a film, as I stated, about kind of the unhoused population, the struggles they're going through, and like the lack of care resources they have, which I feel is kind of crazy in such developed countries that we have these issues still. The project itself, me and two other wonderful filmmakers shot it in 2022. As I mentioned, when we went to Los Angeles for the first time, it was actually during a summer abroad trip with York University, which is my university in Canada, and the Brunel University in the UK, where I met Nikki Ashby. I'm very thankful to her. Yeah, so the film sheds light on the lack of care and help for those struggling in the unhoused community. As you heard, the narrator there was Kira Silverglen. She is an incredibly talented screenwriter. She wrote and narrated the project, and as you heard, she kind of draws parallels between the unhoused in the country and her own experience as a Black woman, and mainly how stigmatization against certain communities and groups of people is incredibly harmful to how we kind of perceive them as a society.
I think working with sensitive material, and I think the subjects of documentaries like minors and younger people is really important. I think my short that I'm looking at is looking at the first day of school for first generation migrants, and that is obviously a period of time that people experience in their youth, and it is taking them back to sometimes a period of time that isn't possibly very positive for somebody to relive and to want to share on camera. So yeah, just keeping a lot of sensitivity and being kind of thoughtful of anything that might trigger any kind of past traumas and stuff like that. But I think obviously sharing how you want the message to possibly uplift and what the final kind of motivation and goal is. So I really enjoyed your trailer, Steph, because I think I could feel the innocence and the youth in what you were trying to talk about, which is obviously a difficult topic and an area for the people involved in it.
And I really love the fact that from each of our standpoints, although we're talking about the general topic of, sensitive content, that still takes on so many different faces, and there's so many different types of sensitive content out there. I just think that those points that you raised, Sarim, were so important. And yeah, I like what you had also said, Steph, about just the seeing even trauma-filled information through different lens, like the lens of children, and what that could look like, what that could mean. What happens after the film is done? Do we, does everybody just forget about everybody and we move on with our lives? Or is there room for, some level of contact with each other, just to ensure that this film process has not left people worse off than they were before.
I think once you make a film or a short or a series, once it's out into the world, it really is out for the audience to interpret how how they want to and how they can, even despite all your motivations and everything. And I think I touched upon my experience at the start, and I've been in TV for 2 years now. But a year of it was working on a Netflix docudrama entitled African Queens, and it was looking at a lot of sensitive issues around the transatlantic slave trade, but yet a lot of sensitive source material around like records of slaves and a lot of accounts from missionaries and kind of how there was a lot of just a lot of traumatic things that had to be portrayed on screen. And I think it really showed me the importance of working with a supportive team. So everybody from the casting assistants to the head of departments, everybody that was involved in the drama and the documentary part of it. And I think another key point, because it was a dispute area of history around slavery, around how involved the African ruling classes were. And even once the trailer was out, there was a lot of kind of discussion around it. And then once everybody watched the show, there's still discussion around it, because once this documentary's out, there's still so much more that happens after after something is completed. A lot of discussions, and I think it also allowed me to take away that remembering who your audience is still allows you to kind of have an impact as long as you know what that is. And I think the series was impactful for people who don't really see their stories being told in traditional docudramas.
Born into an era of darkness, a warrior, a queen destined to lead.
There are no slaves in my kingdom.
She fearlessly defended her kingdom against European power.
The king's under threat. The king is always under threat.
Slavery threatened to decimate a continent.
We are people born running from extinction.
Rising to become a beacon of light for her people.
I have nothing to lose, which makes me dangerous. What do you want? Kind of power that will make a difference in my people's lives. Let's leave these new foreigners in no doubt who I am.
Such a power move. It's such a boss move.
Njinga was a mother of a nation, but she loved her country. And for that, she made great sacrifices.
Njinga was the only African leader to be recognized by European rulers in power as a female king.
I think of her as probably one of the greatest women warriors and women leaders this world has ever seen.
Njinga está presente.
All hail Queen Njinga! Viva! 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 Viva!
Working on the documentary side of it, being involved in the segments where we interviewed historians and contributors and experts around the era, it wasn't something that could be ignored. It wasn't something that looking at the facts and the history and the source material that couldn't be presented. But I also know that there was a lot of impact in terms of the empowerment and the message that was giving across. So balancing motivations and history whilst working with sensitive source material is something that lives on after everything is done, because once it's out into the world, it really is out into the world.
I always think about how impact is greater than intent, like no matter what we present, it's always about how people receive it. And there's a documentary that I was going to recommend that I actually watched recently that was amazing, called Subject. And it's about this exact topic, like what happens to the subjects of these stories after they've been told, and how can we as filmmakers approach things more sensitively, and how can we keep them engaged after the fact. For documentaries too, I always think about how heavy sometimes that subject material can be, and how people are literally just like laying out their own traumas, their own difficult stories, and how difficult it is to even tell those in the first place, let alone on camera. So it's so, just so echoing what everyone's saying, so important to think about that and how that's going to affect people in the long run, in the end, and how to just keep the support alive for them and also for the filmmakers, because sometimes these heavy subjects can weigh on us very heavily as well. So
Subject is a great documentary. I recommend it. I think one thing that we actually haven't touched upon, but is obviously a big popular area of documentaries, is true crime. And I think Subject really talks about how those are real lives, real stories. And after a show or a film is done, there's people that have to live with the results of kind of having a lot of like legal cases being exposed to the world. But yeah, incredible documentary.
Yeah, I actually had a question for Steph. When you had referenced Damo earlier, and I don't want to take for granted that everybody here knows what that is. So maybe you might just want to, just like briefly say what that was about. But just in line with what Paula is saying here, in terms of legal things and people being affected. I mean, obviously, well, for me, as someone who watched only a small part of the series, I actually didn't see a whole lot of it. It was really a lot for me, but how did you and the team maneuver that process of managing people and the impact of the series?
Well, for us in post, like a lot of, what I feel like people don't always understand is that, editing is really the final rewrite of any script, right? Like no matter what the script has in it, how it reads, how it's filmed, what you see, the footage is what's going to determine what the story is, and I think for Dahmer, oh, sorry, you wanted me to explain what Dahmer was. It's a mini-series about Jeffrey Dahmer, but more specifically about like the system that kind of failed all of his victims. But so, in the post process for that, a lot of that was just like really, a lot of really heavy conversations about like, how do we make sure we're not making Jeffrey Dahmer look sympathetic? How do we make sure that like these, victims' voices are heard and seen? And how do we showcase the system that has failed them? And, there were some scenes, like, for example, there's a scene in, I think it's episode 4 of Dahmer, where he basically gets kicked out of college, right? There's like a whole series of events that happen where he, is failing out of school. He's already like an alcoholic in high school. His dad sends him to college. He gets kicked out of college. He goes to the military. He gets kicked out of the military. But while he was in the military is when he was kind of learning how to drug victims and start to really, evolve into a serial killer, essentially. But the way that it was written originally, you just kind of saw that sequence of events, and then it ended with him at this kind of family dinner with his parents. And it kind of just looked like, oh, poor Jeff, like he did this, he just can't get anything right, And so, in the edit, we're like, this is not how we should be showing this particular sequence of events. The fact that he was learning how to drug people while he was in the army, learning about all these different drugs and ways to take advantage of people was important. So we found a way to kind of intercut those beats in that entire sequence. So it's like you might see him fail out of college, you might see him join the army, but you see within his time, he's at his, family dinner talking about being in the army, but you cut away to him learning these things, or cut away to a scene where he's drugged another person who's in the army with him. So it was kind of a matter of finding whatever that kind of delicate balance was in the edit, where you're like, okay, visually this looks like we're being sympathetic, and it's really important not to do that. So I think a lot of our episodes were a matter of figuring out what that balance was, how to portray him, but more importantly, like how to portray the system and the times that the system has kind of failed these victims, but allowed this monster to keep going. So it was really about kind of playing up those moments and making sure that was as clear as possible. It's a heavy watch, but if you watch through, you'll see a lot of the scenes are kind of played in this wide perspective. And that was because, you know, when you're cutting back and forth to these close shots, you're like, oh, here's a reaction, here's a traditional like music cue would come in here. You're kind of signposting how people should feel. And we just really thought it was important to make sure that people were seeing like the full, just watch it objectively for what it is and see these horrible things that were happening. So yeah, in the edit, you know, it was definitely a challenge and a very like heavy process to get there. But I know that, you know, every day we kind of pushed to make sure we were finding a way to not kind of signpost what people should be feeling and not telegraph that, and, you know, just try to pinpoint, I guess, the more important aspects of the story.
Yes, I just wanted to say, I guess I had a similar or basically the same question as Stephanie for Steph. I watched Dahmer, I loved it, but I remember during the time there was a lot of controversy over even like releasing something like that. I had a lot of friends who were not on board because, you know, like Stephanie said, they didn't watch it all the way through. They got to like the first episode and it was just like they were out. But for me, I'm super interested in true crime, and I felt I always knew the Dahmer story, but I felt the way you guys presented it, it definitely gave me a better perspective on the victims, and it like gave me. I don't feel like you glamorized it. I think you guys did a really good job on that. So, you know, I just wanted to say that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think it felt like a lot of the criticism was from before people had seen it, because the whole back half of the series is really about the system and the victims that he's failed. So yeah, it was definitely, I mean, it's obviously, you know, anything that's a true story is going to be a difficult balance to find. I had actually cut true crime documentaries for about 7 years, way back when, and I left that genre completely because I was like, this is not, I don't like the story, you know, I don't like the way that we're presenting things. So I actually came out of crime retirement to tell this one, but that was on the strength of what we were trying, I think, to do with it. So I completely hear and understand some of the criticism that it got. And again, that's the impact versus intent thing. But I'm also very proud of the way that we were able to tell it. And we, you know, editorially, I know we pushed a lot to make sure that the right things were shown.
As an editor, do you have any advice on navigating different intentions and priorities between people involved in the filmmaking process, such as directors, producers, contributors, and your activist self?
You know, it's I feel like it's a delicate world in post-production because you're almost like a therapist for people a lot of the time. But I think it's really, for me, it's always just a matter of understanding. And that's why I think it's so important to be involved early on as much as you can. Just understanding what each person's maybe perspective is on it. Because I think we've all probably worked on projects where people have different ideas of what the project is, but it's somewhere kind of in the middle is usually where you land. So I think it's about having those conversations. Like sometimes editorially, you'll get a note that's, you know, one very specific thing from like, say, a director, and then a producer gives you the exact opposite note. And it's kind of a matter of like, okay, like I have been given these two notes. I would like to discuss both because they're both valid notes, but can we maybe have a conversation about it? Or I'll, you know, if the people are busy, sometimes I'll create like alternate versions of sequences. So maybe like a director has one specific note and I'm like, okay, I'll do it this way, and then I'll do it this way, and then show both just to say like, these are the two variations. I think maybe there's something in the middle, or we can see which one feels like it plays best. So yeah, usually I think it's just a matter of communication, or that's kind of how I try to navigate that, is just like communicating as much as possible and like reaching out to people as much as possible, and just having conversation. Like the more you talk to people, the more you'll understand what the ultimate finished goal should be, I guess. You know, and sometimes there's projects where maybe you don't agree with somebody's note, and that's sometimes the hardest, I think, editorially, because you're just like, oof, I really don't want to do this, but I know I need to try. So that's another instance where creating like an alternate version might serve you, because you'll you know, you're like, okay, I'll do it this way. Here's what I think is almost like the note underneath the note here that I think will work better. So it's kind of just having, like cover all of your bases. I think in in the edit is just have as many options as you can with time permitting.
Thank you. And I would like to thank all of you, Stephanie, Sarah, and Paula. Thank you so much. This has been really interesting. You brought so much to the table and shared so much with us all. So on behalf of us all, a huge thank you.